Hello, my name is Pat Fensom. I am a performance consultant. It is good to be with you today. For those of you that are joining through video and those of you that are seated here with me in the classroom, welcome. Today I want to speak to you about enhancing emotional control with leadership. Very, very broad topic and important topic when it comes to emotional control. The agenda I want to follow this afternoon in this presentation is why emotional control. And with that, I want to present to you a theory. It's called Bandura's self-efficacy theory. And there's aspects of the theory that I feel is very applicable to emotional control. And from that theory, I want to present to you some mental skills training, certain tools that you as a performer, whether it's with an athlete, whether it's in the domain of performing arts, it could be in the domain of business. We all deal with emotions. So I want to present to you some mental skills training that I've placed into practice, and many of my colleagues have as well, and it has enhanced their performance and helped them to deal with emotions that are taking place. And then, following the mental skills training, I want to conduct an activity with you. Another tool to provide you, and I'm going to demonstrate that activity that will take certain emotions that we experience in the process of performance and what we can do about it, what we could proactively assess and make a conscious, deliberate decision to act upon that. So when those emotions are experienced in the course of a performance, we have a course of action that we can put into practice. Now we're going to talk about why emotional control, which is a very good question, and it's a question that has been investigated by many researchers, and certainly something I want to address here today. But before I get into some aspects of why emotional control, I want to share a story with you. This story occurred several years ago while I was still in the military. We had been operating in a foreign country for a long duration, well over 9 months. And at this point where the story took place, we had left our forward location and moved our way back to headquarters. We were one day from getting on the aircraft and return back states. So you can understand the feelings and emotions of many of the members of the team, myself included. We were ready to get back home, get back to our families. We had survived another deployment. And let me add emphasis to the point that the majority of the time found the team in a very forward location where the threat was very high. So 9 months of intense emotions, life or death, those kinds of situations occurred daily, and then multiply this by many lives. So myself and another member of the team was called in to speak with the commander. And the commander shared with us that there was a situation ongoing, and we were one of the few teams that was back that he felt was capable of conducting a mission if a mission needed to be executed. I was in a dilemma at that point. All our gear was packed up. We had already inventoried it. Part of it was already on aircraft. Aircraft was to arrive the following day, and we were going to be wheels up and back to the States. How do I share this information with the members of my team? I was in a dilemma. Certainly had to consider all the emotions that was taking place. I also had to rely on some elements of leadership. We operated on trust, and my concern was that the information that was shared to me would eventually find its way back to the guys, and the first person they needed to hear from was from myself. But with that, there was some concern. How would the guys react? And if we were given that mission, where would our focus be? You could imagine the myriad of emotions that took place, requiring me to be professional, requiring me to be a leader, but also These were guys that I had spent a lot of time with. We had a bond, and there was a lot of mental emotion that had been shelved because we were back at the headquarters. We were one day out from returning to the States. This may not be a situation that you'll come across in the domain you work with, but it's certainly a situation that you could understand, appreciate, and maybe correlate to the world you live in. The myriad of emotions that take place. So that's why I feel this topic of emotional control is very important. So what is emotional control? It's the ability to realize and readily accept and successfully control those feelings. Readily accept, realize them, readily accept, and successfully control those feelings. It's important because changes in your thoughts and feelings is what changes your emotions, and then your emotions play out in how you perform. We see that daily. You could leave shortly after watching this video, and whether you're in the supermarket, driving, coaching, whatever your profession and the domain you operate within brings to the surface, you could see the magnitude of emotions that take place triggered by internal and external stimuli. So when we talk about emotional control here shortly, I want you to consider whether it's my story or a story that you're familiar with and a myriad of emotions that took place. And specifically as leaders, I want you to understand that responsibility we have to lead people, how we process the information, is affected by our emotions. And the decisions we make is constantly being viewed by those we lead. So it has an effect not only on my performance as a leader, but potentially the performance of the organization. So I'm going to give you some mental skills training tools and an activity here shortly that I feel can help you with this, the topic of emotional control. I now want to talk about Bandura's self-efficacy theory. Those watching on video, you'll see a chart, and those in the classroom, if you'll turn to the chart, what you'll see on the left-hand column, 4 boxes, and so top to bottom, the boxes state enactive mastery, followed by vicarious experiences, and then it talks about verbal persuasion, and then the final box talks about the physiological arousal. You'll see in parentheses, it states emotional state. So these 4 areas are 4 sources that Bandura identified as sources of self-efficacy. And so the final box states the emotional state, the physiological arousal. And I think that's where I see emotional control playing into the 4 sources of self-efficacy. Now we have to define what self-efficacy is. Bandura stated self-efficacy is the individual's self-belief in his or her capacity to execute behavior necessary to produce specific performance attainment. And so all these 4 sources feed into having self-efficacy, which plays into the behavior and performance. So when we talk about these areas and specific emotional state, again, we could understand the positives and negatives, the highs and lows, if you will, of the emotions that we experience and how we process them, how we manage them. So I would encourage you in your specific domains as leaders to look at these areas. We'll do an activity here shortly that'll further help you to identify certain triggers, certain stimuli that are commonly found in your domains. But understanding this as an individual and as a performer is very important because, as it states, it does affect behavior and performance. I now want to present to you mental skills training tools that I feel you could put into practice. So in this quick presentation, I've covered why emotional control, and I gave you a theory by Bandura and briefly covered it, and I certainly encourage you to further investigate so you understand those 4 sources. But today we're talking about emotional control. And so the question is, so what? So what in my respective domain when I am experiencing this trigger, this stimuli? So what? How can I deal with that? Well, I'm going to give you some mental skills training tasks, and identified several. One I often utilize is breathing. And you'll see here in the next activity how I've utilized breathing in a particular activity, challenging activity, if you will. But breathing is, I often refer to in the military as tactical breathing, and really taking in the breath, working it down, experiencing your stomach, holding the breath for a set amount of seconds, and then exhaling same amount of seconds, holding it and going through the process. I used 8 seconds. I've heard other coaches talk about 5 seconds. But why is that important? It's been shown to have an impact on your blood pressure, and your cognitive processing is certainly enhanced by the flow of blood. So that's one thing that you can put into practice. I would encourage you to practice that on a repetitive basis, not just when you feel that trigger. Another mental skills training task would be relaxation. Really, mindfulness comes to mind, and those that are practicing mindfulness, but being aware of your body, the tension, where it's at, whether it's in your back, your shoulders, your legs, feeling the sweatness in your palm, being mindful, and then relaxing, working through a relaxation process. I utilize head to toe. There's times where I'm getting ready to hit a building. When I was in the military, I would practice my breathing. As I would visualize this before I went out on an operation, I would work on the relaxation training aspect of it. And then, like I just stated, imagery. Working through, picturing that task that you're about to do. The emotions are still going to be experienced to some degree. You're going to hear that, but how you're able to control that, focusing on your task, is going to be the key to you being able to perform that task. And then goal setting. I think goal setting is very important in the performance realm. But when it comes to emotions, one of the things I placed into practice not too long ago was the goal of identifying and being connected to those emotions and being able to state that in a form of journal. So that helped me understand not just the emotion I was experiencing or the emotions I experienced throughout the day, but how did I act upon that? And what is my goal? If it was a negative, I wanted to make it better. If it was a good reaction on my part, I wanted to sustain it. So some of the things I would do is in my day-to-day activity, I would make it a goal, and I would have it on my calendar if I successfully met that goal of engaging people and not allowing the emotional state or the emotional trigger I just dealt with to come into that engagement. So I had a bad engagement with somebody. Somebody cut me off at the intersection. Then I went into the store, and I could be angry, and I could not want to deal with people, the cashier at the checkout counter, or I could work on not allowing that person that cut me off to affect how I engage other people. So I try to put that in practice, and I set that up in the form of goal setting. Okay, we're now going to conduct an activity. I think you'll enjoy the activity. And again, this is a tool that you could conduct with yourself. You can conduct it with members of your team. And the activity focuses on identifying certain emotions in the process of performance. So this activity is from Jeff Jansen's book titled Peak Performance Playbook. The activity itself is named Mental Toughness or mental moron. Those that are viewing on the video, there is a chart, and I'm going to speak about that chart. That chart has 3 columns, and from left to right, it states challenging situation, and in the center column, it is listed as mental toughness response. And in the far right column, it has the mental moron response. So for the folks that are here in the live audience, in a second, I'm going to ask for a volunteer. And I'm going to ask that volunteer to work through each of those 3 columns so that the folks in the classroom and those in the video observing could follow along. So can I get one volunteer? Oh, Molly, thank you. I appreciate it. Molly, what is the background of your performance domain?
Basketball.
Okay, so you're a basketball player. Very good. So as we go along through this activity, I'm going to go ahead and take the lead, and I'm going to identify a challenging situation from the domain I'm familiar with. Those watching on video, certainly welcome to follow along and think about maybe a challenging situation specific to your domain. Okay, so with a challenging situation, the domain I came from was a high-risk domain, specifically the military. So I'm going to identify parachute operations as the challenging situation. Molly, have you thought about one?
How about free throw?
Okay, so great. As a basketball player, the challenging situation is at the free throw line. Crowds going crazy, certain times of the games, specifically in the fourth quarter, where those points matter. So you're feeling a lot of emotion. You're sensing a lot of emotion internally and externally. And that's true with me when it came to parachute operations. There was a lot of internal emotions that I was sensing. Even after 30 years of parachuting, fear certainly crept up there at different times. And so you go through a myriad of emotions that processes through your cognitive processing. Very good. So the next column is the mental toughness response. So I'll go ahead and take the lead. When it came to parachuting, the proper response, the mental toughness response, would be for me to recall training. We trained, got certified, and over my career, did many parachute operations. So you constantly retrain that. So recalling training would be a correct or example of a mental toughness response. Another response would be breathing. The process of breathing, I call it tactical breathing in the military, and really getting the blood pressure down. And it also assisted with cognitively processing all the stimuli that was taking place, to include the emotions. And then another mental toughness response would be imagery. There's the aspect of training. I've done the task of parachuting several times, but imagining the different steps coming out of the bird, dealing with other parachutists in the air, certainly approaching the ground and getting ready to land. So those would be the mental toughness responses I would put into that column under parachuting. Molly, with basketball, specifically at the free throw line, what items or what would you consider mental toughness responses?
Well, I see a couple things in common with you.
Okay.
Primarily imagery.
Certainly, imagery.
Imagery is the big one, and then breathing.
Breathing, yep. Gaining your composure at the free throw line, certainly.
And then the pre-performance routine was pretty important.
Okay, you got to the line. The crowd's going crazy. There's a lot of pressure. The score may be a matter of a couple points, so there's a pressure of making those free throws. But you've trained in this. You have your routine. Perhaps that routine was bouncing the ball a couple times. Maybe part of bouncing the ball, holding on to the ball, and going through your breathing process. But you had your mental toughness routine, your response. Great. I appreciate that. And then the far right column is the mental moron response, the thing we don't want to do. So reflecting back on parachuting, the mental moron response for me would have been to freezing in the aircraft when the jump master was giving commands. Maybe it was freezing before I even got on the plane, putting on the equipment, and not going through the sequence properly. The other aspect of that would be failing to follow instructions. I was so overwhelmed with the emotions and I had narrow vision, and the leadership that was conducting the parachute operation giving out instructions, and then as a parachutist not following those instructions would have been a mental moron response. What about you, Molly, within regards to being at the free throw line?
I'd have to say, I guess rushing the shot tends to be a negative thing.
Okay, rushing the shot, sure.
And then breaking the routine that I've got.
Breaking the routine that you practice over and over, and you did that routine for a specific reason so that you could follow through. I appreciate you bringing up not bringing up the mental moron response of not making a shot. That's totally out of our element of control. But to stay within the elements that you do control, what you practice. And so again, just like you stated, breaking that routine would have been a mental moron response. So again, this is a tool that you could conduct by yourself, thinking about the challenging situations and the ideal conditions or the ideal response, and then maybe the response that would be in a category of the moron response. You could conduct this with your team. But may I suggest something else you may want to do after this? So the far column where it has the mental moron response, what I would suggest is you take that column and you just rip it off, cut it off, and you throw that in the trash. Because what you want to focus on is looking at that challenging situation. You've identified that. Consider the emotions that take place in that tough situation, and then what the proper response is. And focus on that, and not focus on the moron responses. We're going to take that and we're going to put that in the trash. I've seen sports teams, when a fielder had an error out in the field, they literally had a wastebasket in the dugout. And one of the players, or might have been the coach, would come up to that player and say, tell that player, I want you to take that error and put it in a trash basket. I did that in the military at times where I had engaged someone and I came from a tough situation, and certainly the next person I had engaged did not need to deal with the frustration I might have felt that time. And so if I brought that frustration that I already experienced into the next engagement, one, the clarity of thought on my part certainly is not there, or it's jeopardized. And that individual who is bringing a situation to me as a leader, for him or her to get a response that is tied into a prior event would be unfair to that individual, and it would be a poor example of a leader. So there would be times that I actually had written on my board, put it in the dumpster, and I would try to take that event, that situation I just experienced, and put it in the dumpster. So this is another tool that you can use and put into practice. This concludes my presentation on enhancing emotional control with leadership. Those in the live audience, I want to thank you for joining me today, and those on the video, thank you. We covered several aspects of emotional control. Why emotional control? We also talked about the self-efficacy theory. I presented some mental skills training, tools for you to utilize, and we conducted an activity, another tool for you to perhaps put into practice with yourself or your members of your team. Again, thank you for joining me. We'll see you later.